Okay, so aboutness.
Cut off awareness and it's
Okay.
awareness.
Well, awareness is
Right.
actually being. I've explained the key of awareness, and so really that's a quality that I've explained abstractly already. So I'll just go. So aboutness. Science suggests the brain has awareness of everything about what you're conscious. You are conscious. Different brain areas are aware of different senses, concept types, emotions, and behavior. Brains can increasingly show which parts of your brain are active, can increasingly read what you're conscious of. And they're not only doing that, but we're getting to the point where we actually can begin to read actual codes rather than just what part of the brain is active. Okay, richness. So I already mentioned you've got the equivalent of 100 million HDTV channels. I don't know about you, but if you started playing with computers, really computers, all you had was 80 columns of text alone. And then they got early color vision TVs, and you had pixels that were really big. And then they got smaller, and they were kind of good, but they're kind of grainy. And now I've got a 4K computer, and somebody can show me a film of being in New York City, and you feel like you're there. That's the magic of higher bandwidth. And so the brain has this incredibly high bandwidth, more than enough to explain any sort of the magic, the complexity of the magic we feel. Simultaneity. The different parts of your brain can compute in parallel. The brain is massively parallel. After I did the study with Minsky, for years I would go to AI things and just say, we have to have parallel computing. And they're like, no, that's too hard. And I also said we have to have computer millions of times powerful than we already had. No, the problem is software. We don't understand the problem. And no, dude. The fact of the matter is, I talked to Dagmar Nevins, who was one of Google's chief quantum computer guys at the 2016 tour, Science and Consciousness. And we probably spent about an hour drinking together. And I mentioned they had hired this guy called Hinton, who developed a way to train neural nets much more efficiently. And I said, is that me? No. Okay. Much more efficiently. He said, no, we don't do that. We just use old-fashioned backprop. We just get the machinery to do it. And this is what's happening. What I said back in 1969, 70 needed to happen before we'd have AI is happening. And so AI is happening. But simultaneity means your brain is computing multiple different things at once, but there are mechanisms for unifying them, as we'll say. So really, the most important thing I should mention now is unity. The spatially distributed comp awarenesses of the brain, trillions of synapses, have to be unified to give rise to the rich, coherent awareness of simultaneity and continuity we sense in consciousness. Brain comp awareness has many sources of unity. One is, have you ever seen a picture of a neuron? You know how a neuron works? Well, there's a neuron there, I can't see it. Anyway, a neuron has branches coming into it, like your hand, I guess, right?
Dendrite, the branches, dendrites.
Right. And
Axon, shaft.
right. So they have branches coming into it, and they have a total of about 10,000 synapses per, and I don't know how many. I assume they have more dendrite connections than they have axons, because they can shoot out multiple axons.
You can assume that, yes.
Right. Oh.
Who's that?
Okay. So anyway, what happens is they respond to certain patterns of inputs. And if they get a bunch of inputs from different sources, they respond, they have, their synapses have been trained up to respond to that as a pattern. So a neuron basically is a pattern recognizing machine, and a pattern is a unity of different things. So you can see that's a source of unity. It creates, when the neuron fires, its firing is a form of awareness of a unity of inputs. And except there's this level of complexity, which is that the brain is actually designed of, I don't know, I probably should, ideally I should explain the brain better. The cortex is about 1,600 square centimeters, and that's a fairly reasonably sized dinner napkin. And it's broken up into 2,000 or 4,000 patches. And each patch is made up, I actually have a figure here.
I do have a question.
Yes?
So are you saying that consciousness is actually a biological function?
I would say so, yes. Yes.
Then that would be the theory that consciousness is an emergent property of the wet brain.
Yeah, I guess I can't show you pictures without a mouse because this.
What kind of mouse do you need? I can look in the office and see if we got one.
Well, it'd have to be a Bluetooth mouse. Bluetooth mouse. Yeah, this is a grid of 4,000, roughly 4,000 patches. Each patch has roughly, it varies tremendously, 50,000 cortical columns. A cortical column is there. A cortical column has about this many neurons. And this is a representation of neurons. Some of the neurons talk to the hippocampus, which basically sort of stores short-term memories. Some of them talk to the thalamus, which basically is involved in the tuning of the brain. The brain is a tuned machine. It basically is, neurons can go into a rhythmic firing mode, and it basically, one of its functions is to determine which assemblies in the brain. The brain basically, a patch can have 50,000 cortical columns. Each cortical column is basically a smart pixel. It basically has roughly 1 million synapses and roughly 80 neurons. And so it's a smart pixel, and the brain is like a TV screen in which different patches watch each other. So how does the brain have self-awareness? Its patches watch. A given patch will watch multiple other patches.
How does it do that?
The connection architecture. More or less, it gets the outputs from patches above it, and it gets input from patches below it.
Well, vibrational messages.
Well, they're electrochemical. A neuron, the axons and the dendrites are like little tubes which electrochemical waves pass through, because they have these little valves on them, little molecular valves that they normally are at a negative voltage, but you raise it up to a certain voltage, and certain of those little valves open up and let in, I think more positive ions. And so you get a positive wave, but after it's been open for a while, all of a sudden it starts letting in negative ions, and it goes negative. So you get a wave that's negative, but goes positive, and then goes negative again, that travels down these little tubes. So the brain is made up of all these little tubes that basically transmit electrochemical waves. And it can do this, it can send these things. I don't know exactly the normal frequencies don't get much standard. It's very common for your brain to going 40 hertz or 50 hertz, but the actual phase timing is down to a millisecond.
All of this to develop artificial intelligence?
No, you have to know part of it. You have to know part of it. But one of the world's current leaders in artificial intelligence is an Englishman called Demis Hassabis, who has a Chinese Singaporean mother and a Cypriot Greek father, and he was a child prodigy chess champion, and then he quit high school at like 16 to write video games, made a certain amount of cash, co-wrote a very successful, Britain's most successful video game. Then he went to Cambridge University, got double honors in computer science. Then he went out and formed his own video game company, made more cash. Then he formed, then he went and got a PhD in neuroscience from the University of London. Then he did a postdoc at Pojo's group, and I've attended multiple Pojo lectures at MIT. And then he started a company called DeepMind, sold it out to Google for $400 million after a couple of years, and now is running DeepMind in England. And they're the company that is winning, it's beating the world's best Go champion, a game that people said computers would never be able to win at because it involves intuition. And when I did this study on Herminsky, I was going around Harvard saying, everybody says they can't figure out how a computer could do intuition. I was saying it's easy. It's easy because Minsky had taught me something called K-line theory, which I never heard anybody other than Minsky mention it. But I did mention it to Deb Roy, who was the guy who did the speech-own project at MIT after a lecture. And he said, oh, Minsky didn't invent that. But he said he thought it was a very cool theory. The K-line theory is imagine a brain that records everything. And imagine as it records stuff, it activates similar memories. And from that, it generates expectations.
That's what daydreaming is. There's actually the computers are doing for airplanes to do that. Daydreaming's a good thing.
Right, and I understood the concept, but I didn't know how to make it work really well until '97. And I figured out what I call the Gen Comp hierarchy, which I talk about here, which basically what it allows a computer to do is to activate tens of thousands of memories and rapidly, within fractions of a second, develop meaningful generalizations from them. And
It does. It's random probabilities. But then during that daydreaming time period, and the man, Singer, is it Singer?
Singer, yeah.
Singer.
Wolf
Jerome Singer. I don't know. Yeah. That the daydreaming.
Wolf Singer or Charles Singer?
German. His name is Jerome Singer.
Oh.
And what the planes are using it for is then it can generate, what if there's a hijacking? What if there's an electrical storm? What if there's this? So then it prepares readiness to react during some sort of crisis. And so during the time the plane's flying, it's not using as much of its computer technology, so it goes into daydreaming mode, and that's actually what it's doing. It's generating the expectations and probabilities.
Right.
Is it normally running on a program, and then there's another program that says this is what you do in an emergency?
It's just the same program, but it's not being used for landing gear, for, all of the things that would be using in taking off and landing. So during that time, it's just generating probabilities. So some of us took that and looked at, the human mind and spending time in meditation or in daydreaming, how much time you can generate if you actually do it correctly, do good expectations, what's possible, crisis monitoring.
Right, I mean,
But that's based on the same principle of just the looking at enough possibilities, enough probabilities, and I guess you'd say collapsing across that.
Which within the human literature you can account for pretty easily by spreading activation and some other mechanisms that have been studied in great detail.
Yeah, spreading activation was something I was talking about all the time back when I was doing that thing under Minsky. Spreading activation is a key part of how the brain works.
And a lot of it's, because I'm reading this up here, a lot of it has to do with the pattern recognition again.
Right.
What your daydreaming is, if it's a productive daydreaming, is looking at pattern recognition and seeing what's the likely outcomes.
Right. Well, as I said, and not only do neurons detect patterns, but the patches of the brain are designed in hierarchies. I wish my mouse would work, so I have pictures representing that. But basically, the lowest level of your brain is, of your visual brain, is called B1, and it's pretty much like a TV screen. It's had some filtering done to it, but it's pretty much like a TV screen. And then above that, you have patches that are connected to areas of that which look for patterns in that TV screen that look for patterns like lines, areas that are half dark and half light, and then you have patches that look in areas of those and say, oh, that's a straight line connected to a straight line connected to a 90-degree line. And well, that's a pattern. And then you have higher things that out of that construct larger visual shapes. And this goes through multiple different levels. And then you have things that actually recognize indications of those unities, and from them, say, assign an object type to it. And those things would then, and if that's recognized, then memories of that pattern in terms of association with other patterns get activated. And so basically, the hierarchical neural networks, and if you hear people talk about deep learning, which is occurrent in current AI, that is hierarchical patterns. And so the brain is capable of representing not just the pattern at this level, and the pattern at this level, and the pattern at this level, but a chain of activation, a spreading chain of activation down the whole hierarchy all at once, because with synchrony, those patterns fire together at all different levels. And other parts of the brain, because they're firing at the same level, it actually has a form of information saying they're part of the same thing.
But isn't that programming?
Well, it's programmed by the intelligent design of biological evolution, yes.
Well, like for artificial intelligence now,
Right.
Arlington had a little car that was driverless. And it worked because it had cameras and it had sensors. But it was running on a programmed route.
Yes.
And it was programmed with these sensors
Yes.
and cameras.
Almost all of the current really effective AI that's new is based on this hierarchical representations, learning hierarchical representations, and then, so learning hierarchical patterns, recognizing hierarchical patterns, and it's not only a hierarchy of composition, there is also generalization hierarchies. And it's my belief that generalization is largely represented within the patch by basically, you'd have a key code that represents the more general. This is my hunch because it would just be so much more efficient from a computational communication standpoint. You have a key central code, and then you have extensions to it which say, oh, it's not only an animal, it's a mammal, it's a dog, it's a bulldog. And then with that longer code would be projected down the hierarchy and tune the patterns within those to be appropriate for a bulldog, as opposed to a cockroach. You see what I'm saying? And so you get this large univated activation, and so let me just continue here. So you have unities of synchronous timing. Okay, unities of synchronous timing. So I told you that synchronies are absolutely vital to the brain. The brain is a tuned, timed machine. Synchronies are important in a lot of electronics. I mean, a lot of electronics are synchronous. A lot of electronic communication. A TV signal has got a repeated time signature for each screen. And then you have unities of synchronous tuning. If you have, I remember I heard Wolf Singer, that's actually, he's one of the major people who hyped synchrony as being important at a lecture at MIT, and he was basically saying how they would do something with cats, and basically the cat would have a certain behavior it learned, and the behavior would say, look at one thing and then look at another, or look at one thing and then listen for a sound, and basically the cerebellum would actually, after the first state, the cerebellum would then change to a second state where it would tune one area of the brain into another area of the brain so the computation required for the next step could be performed. And so tuning is very important. The thalamus plays a key role in tuning between different areas. Also the basal ganglia does. And then, this is really amazing, unities of multiplex synchronous tuning. So a lot of brain patches function by, if they're in one state, they have a preference for switching to certain other states. Because the brain has learned over time common state transitions from a given state. And so oftentimes a given pattern will be like 5 or 6 or 7, maybe even 8 things. So if it's in one state, it will go boom, 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 boom. And the brain actually can do what they call theta gamma phase synchronization. There are other brainwave synchronizations where it will be firing at like 8 times a second. It will be firing a 5-part sequence. So it will, and when it does that, it's basically creating, there's a unity for the first pattern across the brain, then a unity for a second pattern across the brain, then a unity for a different pattern, the third pattern, the fourth pattern, the fifth pattern, and they repeat. And because these synchronous states are associated with each other, it enables you to actually have synchronized awareness of 5 different things that are each sort of a complex pattern together in unison, so that it actually can tune, a fairly rich, complex state. And that same timing mechanism is used for a lot of behaviors also. The brain makes multiple uses of a lot of this. So unities of memories. Memories create unities of awareness across time. You can remember something today and remember it tomorrow. And they create awareness of your past time. And the unities of self, the brain's relatively stable population of complex experiential memory patterns provide the unity of self. And unities are mutual, that's theoretical, so I won't go into that. And so one of the really big things that this unity enables, meaning and grounding. I think one of the most magical parts of our consciousness is we're not just aware of bits on a screen, we're not just aware of patterns that are just nothing but patterns. We're aware of meaning. And meaning results from the complex activations that can happen in the brain. Because if you see an ISIS flag, for example, if you imagine from K-line theory, you activate your memories of ISIS flags, and then you basically select sort of the strongest activations from those, basically get enough activation for you to become conscious of them.
That implies certain age, yes?
What?
It implies certain age. You cannot have that at a very early age. You are compiling and storing.
Well, that's why little kids are so, like
Yes.
little babies are just so kind of clueless.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And one of the things, I was actually seated next to a baby on our late flight back from Boston last night, and I mean, this kid I pulled out my Mac and he was just pushing the buttons. He's a year and a half old. And he just wanted to push the buttons. He was just like, so it's like, I can't do that. I didn't, but one of the things they say is animals are predisposed to just do action, just to learn by experience. And because they're not a tabula rasa, there's a fair amount of stuff that is instinctual, but they're, compared to an adult, they're a
Is
tabula
there
rasa.
such a thing as a cellular memory? So you come with memories. From the moment you're born, you already have your DNA.
Well, there
comes-
is
so you
instinctual
are
stuff in
already-
the brain.
You're prepped for.
Well, number one, you learn in the womb, but even before that, some stuff is instinctual.
Exactly.
What comes to my mind is that a newborn baby knows how to nurse.
Yes,
As soon as it gets the proper stimulus,
yes.
it knows how to nurse.
Now, I don't know if it's true. I went to a conference, a Singularity conference in 2007 in San Francisco, and there was a guy, Sam Adams, who was one step below being an IBM fellow, but they let him do like a 1.5-year study on the development of a child's brain through 6 years of age. And he claimed, when the idea of instinct, he claimed that there is evidence that the connection in the visual areas of the brain are predisposed to detect circles, and that's the mother's, what do you call it?
Areola.
Areola.
Right.
And the fetus is sucking its thumb in utero by, what, about 4
Right.
months?
That's
Yeah.
true, yeah.
Right, and see, the way the brain wires itself, it's a very complicated thing, but one of the way it does it is these axons and dendrites, particularly axons and dendrites grow. They have a little head that is like a chemical sensor, and they can swim toward chemical gradients that they've been programmed to swim for. And that enables a certain amount of selected pre-connection in the brain.
So some things are pre-digested, and that fluid becomes richer and richer, so we are evolving.
Right, but a lot of that stuff is really quite primitive, like,
So the primitive still stays, because you're in your primitive brain, you have reactions that are animalistic. But
I
I'm
don't
talking
know.
about more the memories that, you're compiling, how much of that is pre-inherited in your DNA. It comes already, yeah, because sometimes, don't you ever have something that comes out of nowhere and you don't know what it is, you do it, you know exactly, you understand it implicitly, and then I take the pains to find out what that is, and it comes from a totally different time, but it's an experience. So where does that come from? Because it came from some part of my brain.
yes, well, if I was to discuss all of this, I have a section where I say that there are many different levels of awareness. And if you're really aware of one thing, your awareness of that one thing involves a semi and increase and subconscious awareness of things that give it meaning. And so you're often aware of meaning with not being explicit. I mean, you can summon up an explicit meaning, and you sometimes will summon up an explicit meaning, but your behavior and your feelings and your thought process is largely determined by subconscious activations or semi-conscious activations. There's a whole continuum from high awareness down to awareness that only sort of statistically slightly affects your behavior. So yes, I mean, there's a whole continuum of that, and it's the fact that you can be aware of many things at once. You can only be aware of a few things at once with intensity and clarity, but you can be aware of many things at once and at sort of a semi-conscious or subconscious level.
Like peripheral.
So is this, I don't know when I'm supposed to shut up.
You've got another hour.
What?
No, I'm joking.
I don't know, does anybody find some problem with my theory that they find hard to believe? Yes?
Can you differentiate for us how you perceive, how you define intelligence versus how you define consciousness? Because all this pattern recognition, collection of experience and behavior, to me that's intelligence.
Right. They're related concepts. They're not identical. I think you don't, number one, you have to understand that only the really, really, really stupid people aren't quite smart compared to most animals.
They're all watching Trump right now, by the way.
Non-local. I just had it too.
I told Gail when I heard, I didn't realize that last night that Trump's speech was today, and I said, well, nobody's going to come, they're all going to be watching.
Oh, yeah.
And she said,
That's why we're here.
"You're not this crowd."
You're a lot more interesting.
Oh, than Trump.
I'm raising my hand so you'll answer.
Oh.
I'll just say that everything that she said, a lot of us would consider intelligence one of many subsets in the realm of consciousness.
Okay.
Well, and
Even the unintelligent can be
well,
considered
there are many
conscious.
different types of intelligence, and that's why I think IQ tests are, I believe that IQ tests are one of the more important single metrics you can have to predict somebody's path through life. But there are many different types of intelligence, and IQ puts one number on a multidimensional thing. And once there began to start being a lot of microprocessors, they began to judge them by testing them on 10 different things. And if one microprocessor would be really good at, say, the video game part on the video of video games, but another would be much better on the physics engine of a video game. So it's the same thing with the brain. There are many. I saw a correlation between SAT verbal and math scores, and yeah, there was a correlation there, but it wasn't as strong as I would have thought it was. I mean, if this is the box and this is the diagonal, there were a lot of points like over here and down there.
Howard Gardner's will claim, he will agree to at least 9.5, because the 10th one he considers spiritual, and he said he doesn't want to go there, but he'll go 9.5
What?
for
Different
intelligences.
Dimensions?
Yeah, dimensions of intelligence.
Oh boy, I bet you there are more than that.
I do too, but he says he won't go to the 10, because that would mean there might be a spiritual intelligence, and he doesn't want to be quoted
Well,
on that.
my whole feeling, my feeling is that I think, my realityism, when I say reality defined by science, has many of the aspects of a God, it has spirits. I consider the human consciousness to be a spirit. And, I mean, if you read the Bible, the portrayal of God is he's just a human who can do a hell of a lot of stuff. He's like a really, really powerful human. And so he's a consciousness. He's a mind. So I think that being spiritual is not something that's at all at odds with science. In fact, there are awful lot of scientists who are really into meditation, and so I don't really see a divide. But maybe he doesn't want to get into religion.
That's what I mean, he doesn't
Right.
want,
But
he
then there
doesn't
are
want
people
that.
who leave their body when they're clinically dead for X number of minutes or hours, and they're perfectly aware of all kinds of stuff. They're trying to talk to people who are in the room that they aren't seen by anybody else, but they can see other people in the room. And these are thousands of people who have had these
Right,
experiences.
well, just if, from my feeling is, I think taking lots of LSD would be dangerous, but I think if we were in an enlightened society, there'd probably be a ritual where there'd be a couple times in your life where you take a trip under, a year after I graduated from Harvard, there was a wealthy Egyptian who was attending Harvard Medical School who claimed he never did drugs, but he went to the Amazon, discovered new psychedelics. He had enough money to do that. And he also taught a course on psychedelics that was just in the basement of some dorm. And he had us read some books. One of them was by Andrew Weil, who was a real head in the day. And but this book basically said that in most of the primitive societies that have psychedelics, they have ritualized usage and rules that limit the use, so that the tribe next door that doesn't do drugs kills them all, and takes their land. They have, the societies in order to survive have to learn, you have to control drug use.
I just want to recommend a book, and I can put it in the meetup link box, but it's by Michael Pollan, one of my favorite authors, called How to Change Your Mind. And he's a very interactive author. He likes to get his hands into whatever he's researching and writing about, and so he went on a journey while writing this book about psychedelics and met people from Harvard and Timothy Leary's group, and like all over Roger Stamets, I think that's his name, in Washington DC, British Columbia. They went out and picked wild mushrooms. I mean, it's just a fantastic
Oh, he
read.
did mushrooms too?
Yeah, and he did a lot of different psychedelics, but he says the best thing for the baby boomer generation right now would be ritualized psychedelics.
Well, that's Dr. Stanislav Grof, who's been, what's he, almost 90
Yeah.
now?
I highly recommend it. And then another, just an interview that I heard on Lost Arts Radio, and I'll put this link on the site too, is called The Consciousness of Bees.
Yes, it's wonderful.
Oh, it is
yeah.
wonderful. I mean,
It
if
was
you wanna
at
learn about
Sand, they were at
consciousness,
Sand this past year.
It's
Yeah.
fantastic.
What was the name?
Lost Arts Radio, The Consciousness of Bees.
I've got it.
I'll put it on
And what was Michael Pollan's book?
How to Change Your Mind.
It-
Yeah, no,
Stanislav
I
Grof.
thought, you know, my drug use, particularly when I was doing the study on Minsky, was very valuable. Like one of the things Minsky's book talked about was spatial filtering, which is the idea that one of the ways that your brain sort of encodes patterns is it kind of generates sort of multiple different waveforms in a way that will create peaks in certain places. So you know, basically, you sort of have waves. It's sort of a wave representation of a brain, and that's actually major compression algorithms used in computer. I think JPEG uses something like that. And but when I was having highs, I noticed that if there was a pattern, and there would be sort of a regularized extension of it, I would be more likely to hallucinate a repetition of it there, where it would sort of make more sense from a waveform standpoint. And, you know, just things like that that were very interesting. So, anyway, I think I'd probably talk, oh, yes?
I'm always interested in definitions and terminology, and I know that we don't have any physical, I'm assuming we have no physical record to look at, but at what point in evolution would the identifiers be? Would you consider that on one side we have no brain, the other side brain?
Well, if you just sort of think about, you know, the tree of life, Darwin's tree of life, and you just think of what there was that would correspond to a brain there, you know, it's an evolution. I went to some conference on neurocomputing in the late 80s, and some guy was talking about the brains of lobsters, and this guy was claiming a lobster doesn't have a brain, they have a bunch of them, ganglions, and some of them are, you know, like 15 neurons. I mean, they're teeny. And
But there'd still be a brain.
it computes, you know, but, you know, the neurons would probably have a hell of a lot of synapses, so they can store a lot of information, but, you know, that's a pretty simple brain. So, you know, there's a whole possible continuum of consciousness, and of course, that continuum can be multidimensional because there are multiple different qualities of consciousness. Let me go back if I can. So these are different, like for example, memory, like just with regard to IQ. Some people have really good memories. I mean, just stunning memories, but they're not incredibly creative. You know what I mean? Some people don't have, like I don't have, I mean, I used to have a decent memory, but there were people who had much better memories than me. I went and worked with Dragon System. I was a patent attorney there, and I was also supposed to be part-time doing whatever I wanted to do that was cool. And the head guy there, Jim Baker, had the highest grade point average of anybody at Princeton for the previous 50 years. And about technical matters, I only had one conversation where he didn't explain to me why I was wrong in like one sentence. You know, he was that smart. He
That's
just
been an annoying
nailed it.
person here.
No, because it doesn't get to, he doesn't say it like you're wrong. He just says, but so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And you go, oh, you know what I mean? But one time, I argued with him, and the argument went on for 10 minutes, and he came into my room to follow me, so I knew I wasn't risking getting fired. And I finally QED'd him. I was sitting in a chair, and he his face dropped and he ran out of the room. And this was an office in an old mill building, so we only had walls up to 8 feet beyond that space. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, he said, "Yes, but." And then he gave a qualification. And I said, yes, with that qualification, I would agree. So, and I don't think that had ever happened to him for decades. So.